Hi everyone, thank you for staying to the bitter end. I do appreciate every single one of you for being here, and a special round of applause once again for Matt, for inviting me and hosting this. It's incredible to share the love and the knowledge of the Grand Canyon. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the Grand Canyon Trust, who we are, what we do, and then to give you a sneak peek behind the scenes into the GIS program. We work a lot behind the scenes, so a lot of people actually don't see what we do except for the final product, so I'll give you a little glimpse into my world. I'm going to have to fiddle with this computer for a second. 1 second, sorry. Where's there? Can we get rid of the notes? Sorry, I don't want the notes. Perfect. Okay, thank you. The Grand Canyon Trust was established in 1985, mainly around natural resource issues around the Grand Canyon. And soon after the establishment of the trust, it became very clear that the threats did not stop at the edge of the canyon itself, but extended much further into the Colorado Plateau, and an impassioned plea was made that the trust extend their work beyond the canyon and across the entire Colorado Plateau. Today, our mission is to safeguard the wonders of the Grand Canyon and the Colorado Plateau while supporting the rights of Native peoples. We envision a Grand Canyon and a Colorado Plateau where wildness, a diversity of native plants and animals, clean air, and flowing rivers abound. Sovereign tribal nations thrive, a livable climate endures, and people passionately work to protect the region they love for future generations. Our focus and our teams work collaboratively together across many different areas across the plateau. Our Native America team works to support intertribal networks, build resilient economies, and help protect ancestral homelands. Our energy team has taken on a very bold challenge for carbon neutrality across the Colorado Plateau by 2035 and works to prevent uranium contamination and unconventional fuel development. We work in a variety of facets across our public lands to protect and restore them and advocate for a better balance of livestock grazed and livestock-free public lands. We've worked to do springs restoration across the North Rim and southern Utah and work on market-based strategies to restore, mitigate, and adapt in the face of water scarcity. But today, I'm not going to talk about all the many aspects of the Grand Canyon Trust, but I'm going to talk to you specifically about the GIS program, what I've been working to build since 2012, and what we've been recently working on for Grand Canyon. So in the GIS program, we work on advanced cartography. We also perform spatial analysis and interactive web mapping. We take this further into interactive storytelling, providing data visualizations, and strategic planning for all of the Grand Canyon Trust conservation programs, as well as our communications and our development teams. So let's get into Grand Canyon and what we've been doing recently. Most of our work for Grand Canyon in the recent years has primarily been in the education and outreach arena. We've been doing this by working with the Esri Story Maps platform. One example of this is our Threatened Waters Grand Canyon Seeps and Springs interactive story map, which takes users through a journey of the precious springs that exist throughout the Grand Canyon region and the work that we are doing with volunteers to restore these springs across the North Rim lands. Another example of a story map that we've produced, this is actually an older map than the Threatened Waters Grand Canyon Seeps and Springs. This is the Keep the Canyon Grand map, which actually is an Esri award-winning story map that won the 2015 story map second place in the Esri story map competition at their user conference. This one tells the story of Grand Canyon and its threats with uranium mining as well as development threats across the canyon, and tells the story of people fighting to protect the canyon from these threats. A recent one that we produced in honor of the Grand Canyon Centennial, and one of the things that brought us all here today, is a story map that we created called the Grand Canyon in 100 Images. One of the things I like to do a lot of times is break the rules for anyone who knows me well. And so with this story map, we used it in a little bit of different way than what folks normally use the story journal for. Normally they use it like the Keep the Canyon Grand or the Threatened Waters story, where it has a lot of text that you walk through. This one actually is a photo tour. So instead of using the photo tour or the photo series that Esri provided, we decided to do this within the story journal. And I found out on my way here that Esri wants to highlight this in their March blog. So we'll see if that happens. So keep an eye out for that. You never know when it comes to media if it's going to get bumped or if they're going to pick it up or not. So I wanted to give kind of a behind the scenes into my approach when we create these stories. We're always integrating interactive maps into them, but we try to make the interactive products as versatile as we possibly can. So within the interactive maps, there's always a goal to use the text on the side, so like in this cascade type layout, where we're trying to draw people into what the content of the map is. That way, if they don't want to interact with the map, they quickly already get your message. So the message here was to highlight how many volunteer hours, which we've laid out directly with the 5,600. If you want to dive deeper, you can dive deeper because it's an interactive map. The other thing that we can do is we can highlight the stories of our individual volunteers, and this is quite precious. And I was going to read it, but I can't read the tiny print on this. So if someone can read it.
I thought it would be boring, but it's actually pretty exciting. There's an ATV, and I get to dig in the mud, and there's frogs, and it's actually pretty cool out here.
The next generation of conservationists. 7 years old, by the way. One of the other great things with these interactive story maps is to take them out and use them throughout our website. Use them as engagement tools so people can better understand if they want to get out in the field where we've been and how many volunteers have been there. So this is an example where we've used this map on our volunteer page. Or if we want to zoom into a specific area, you can see what kind of restoration work that's taking place there. We have plans to expand this into the future, so keep an eye out. And of course, if anyone is familiar with the Grand Canyon Trust or the GIS program's work, can I just first get a hand of people who are familiar with the trust already? Cool. And how many are familiar with our GIS program or some of the products that we've produced in one way or the other? Great. Hands to you as well. So cartography is a huge part of the work that we do. Obviously, we are place-based, and I don't have to tell this crowd how important it is to have maps in order to understand that place. It is not the only tool that you can use, but it is a very powerful one, especially in our modern technological days. So cartography is definitely a very strong pull for me personally. It's something that I love, and I love telling this story, and I like to tell the same story in different ways. And so here at the Grand Canyon, what I did is I turned the Escalade development that was proposed for the confluence of the Colorado and the Little Colorado River and displayed this in almost a 3D type representation. So when you look at it, you go, wow, someone actually really wants to build a gondola down to the confluence. And exactly, that's the exact reaction we want to see. Hands to the face, shaking your head. Another type of map that I have created recently is this active mining claims within the mineral withdrawal around Grand Canyon. Here we have graduated circles to represent the number of claims held by each of the individual companies. And I'll come back to this one a little bit more in one of my challenges of mapping the Grand Canyon with the example of data. But one of the things I do strategically within the GIS program is to take a product and not allow it to be static, but to make it into an interactive and a livable, breathing document where people can dive deeper into the issues. So more recently, we have launched this exact same data in an interactive form that you can go on our website and explore the individual claims around the canyon. We're going to take this one step further and map these into 3D columns, bending ArcGIS Pro to our will. Thank you to David Vines, my GIS associate, who painstakingly worked on pulling these claims into a 3D view. The other thing that is not quite traditional mapping, but it is creating graphical representations of the issues that we face within conservation. Here you see an example of the brassica pipe and uranium ore, typical of what you would find around Canyon Mine on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. So not everything we do is mapping threats, although unfortunately that seems to be one of the primary things that I've been working on the past couple of years. We also get to map protection of the Grand Canyon. On Saturday, Representative Grijalva announced the Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act. I produced a series of maps for our communications team, and the idea here is to create a series where it can be simplistic, and to create a series where there's some style and there's options for media if anyone wants to grab some of these maps to help us spread the word for the Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act. So I'll just walk through quickly. This isn't rocket science. I just take off the background, keep it simple, and a lot of times media is more likely to pick it up than they are if it's actually styled. So with each of these examples, we can add in the mines, we can add in the claims, represented in a little bit of a different way. It's a bit much to ask media to grab a product that takes readers 3 or 4 minutes to try to digest. So the goal here is to give a snapshot, and with our society that seems to have a hard time focusing in, hopefully we can capture them in a few seconds. So we can take the background back off. Let's make it a little simpler. So I wanted to share a little bit of my personal story and my challenge when I was faced with mapping Grand Canyon for the first time, and it's a challenge I still continue to face as a cartographer. I am from North Carolina, so I was used to a topography that kind of made sense. We go from the mountains in the west to the foothills, rolling hills, and the Piedmont gets a little flatter, and the coastal plain. And when it comes to shaded relief, that was really simple to map. I didn't have to put a lot of thought into it. But when Roger Clark, our Grand Canyon program director, wanted me to map Grand Canyon, it was a very different story. I found that those typical and traditional shaded reliefs really oversimplified the desert environment, oftentimes making some of the places that are hotter give this sense of coolness by being blue. So I worked for quite some time. It took me several years before I found the gradient that I really loved, but I worked to create a personalized shaded relief that mimicked the vegetation and rock layers that you see across the Grand Canyon and the Colorado Plateau. So here you see an example on the right is, you will see the aerial imagery, and on the left is my shaded relief. The idea is that they're very close together. The other thing that I encountered when I stepped into mapping the Grand Canyon was this challenge of contours. I'm an avid hiker and backpacker, and so I wanted to map contours at an interval that you would actually go on the ground and use like a topographic map. One of the #1 requests I get from staff is also to map contours. So when I tried the first time to ever go in and do this, I threw in some intervals. I actually didn't pull the one that I did because I deleted them because I never used them. But even at the 100-foot interval, trying to map this, the Grand Canyon became this gray blob that was completely useless. So then I discovered, well, I'm going to have to do much larger intervals. So this isn't going to be useful for really anyone on the ground. And so if you actually pick up a copy of the map that is over there, it is not meant for you to go out and try to hike with that map. Please don't, unless you are very familiar with those trails. So ultimately, with a lot of cartographic magic, if you're curious on how I do it, I don't have time to go into those details with you here today, but I'm more than happy to share some of my tips and tricks there. But with some cartographic magic, we end up with a really nice rendering of the Grand Canyon and contour lines. Again, don't take it out on the trail. If you're interested in actually going out on the trail, you should check out grandcanyontrust.org/hikes. We have the Colorado Plateau Explorer, which talks about some of the hikes around the Colorado Plateau and the conservation issues that we face within those landscapes. So the other thing that I faced when I looked at these contours was an oversimplification of the area on the Coconino Plateau. So here I finally achieved within the Grand Canyon a more simplified view with the contour lines that I thought was aesthetically pleasing, but I had lost a lot of detail on the plateau areas. And so for this specific product, we covered it up with a text box. I didn't have to solve that problem, but it's still something that I face consistently, especially when our staff members want a topographic map and want a topographic map of the entire Grand Canyon. Yeah, right? So one of my little things, just my little nuggets that I like to do when I am working with the Grand Canyon, and it's at a scale where I can do this, a lot of times you see the center line portrayed for the Colorado River. Well, we know the Colorado River to be far more dynamic than just the center line. There's areas that are wider, there's areas that are narrow, and I like to show those within my cartographic products. So I take the contours on either side of the canyon and shade that area in instead of using a line to represent the river. And then I add a couple of little things like lighting to try to give it just a little bit of a shimmer. I want to work harder to try to make that representative to the rapid location. So maybe in a couple of years you might see some products that are more realistic to the ground. So real quickly, I just want to walk through the data challenge, which I don't think if any of you have worked with data in GIS, you know that this is probably one of our #1 hurdles. So I just wanted to use the example of the mining claims map that I showed you earlier. So that data is pulled from the BLM, and it comes from a database called the LR2000. And this is spatial data. It is referenced by the Meridian Township Range and Section. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, I can use this. Well, I thought I could. It was not as easy as I thought it was going to be. So what I found out was that the BLM's data set for the PLSS does not match the unique identifier for Meridian Township Range and Section within the two databases. So what happens? They don't link. So in order to fix this, I had to either decide to add the PLSS Township Range and Section ID into the LR2000 system, or to integrate the Meridian Township Range and Section from the LR2000 into the PLS. I decided to integrate it into the PLSS system. This way that anytime we want to look at the mining claims at any time stamp of time, that is already done, and then all we have to do is connect the data itself. Because as soon as I downloaded this data, it was out of date. So once we connect the two databases, here I'm presented with another challenge. The challenge where we have multiple claims that stack into one area. How easy is it to take an area and map by the claim holder the number of claims that they hold, but it's represented by a little square that stacks up on top of each other. So we needed to convert that into something that was easier for people to understand. My solution was running some frequency statistics by the claimant, the claim holder, and portraying those as graduated circles, hence getting to, with some more cartographic magic, the final product that you see today. I wanted to give you a little glimpse of what's next for the GIS program. We've been working to create a product for the upcoming Spring Advocate, where we're going to be showing the differences in the boundary in the history of Grand Canyon National Park. This complements very closely an article that Roger Clark, who is in the audience today and has been speaking with people for the past couple of days, it complements his text directly, and this is on purpose. We customize all of these the cartographic products to directly fit with the text of the advocate itself. Just real quickly, I'm not going to go through each of these because if you've been here for the past couple of days, you've seen these already or they're sitting around in the room. But each of these are some of the historic maps that we pulled together for this effort and pulling them in. And again, thanks to David Vines for doing through the pain of digitizing these, and we will be using them. So take a look at the Spring Advocate. If you're not a member of the trust and you don't receive one of these by mail, you can become a member of the trust and receive one by mail, or you can also find them online when we do launch the online versions. Another sneak peek of something that we haven't quite released yet, but we've been playing around with, is other forms of 3D mapping to map the threats and the protection opportunities within Grand Canyon, and we'll spread it out across the entire Colorado Plateau once we perfect it a little bit. So if you're interested in the Grand Canyon Trust, if you're interested in the products that we create, see what we're up to from time to time, you can find a lot of our products on grandcanyontrust.org/resources. You can filter by Grand Canyon. If you're only interested in Grand Canyon, you can filter by maps if you're only interested in maps, or filter by interactive maps if you're just completely done with print material altogether and you just want digital copies. More importantly, get active with us. We love our community to grow. So sign up for our newsletters. We have a sign-up sheet right over here at our table where we've been at. So we'd love for you to sign up for us, stay informed on what we're doing. We will send emails about volunteer opportunities and action alerts. And also, please, it's amazing how important social media is in our day and time. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Vimeo, all of these places. It helps us. It helps get the word out. These things work by you individually sharing it, and then it pops up on your friend's page, and it goes on and on. If you're so interested, I also have a Twitter page. I admit that I'm horrible at keeping up with it. Trying to be better.
Any questions? Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, Kevin.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for your work.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for coming.
A quick question. Have you thought about or made any maps that attempt to depict the auditory landscape of the canyon, the soundscape, specifically in relation to areas where you can experience natural silence unimpaired by human sounds?
Oh, I love this question. Ellen, a lady who works with us in the Grand Canyon, her and I have been talking about creating some sort of soundscape for quite some time. It is something I would absolutely love to do. And basically what it's going to take is getting those audio or lack of audio, that natural sound in the places where we need it, perhaps the sound of a rapid or an animal captured on tape. And then what I would also like to do is compare that to the areas where it's not so quiet, like the helicopter noise that we hear in Grand Canyon. And so I think that could be quite powerful to see what it could be versus how people actually exist within the canyon at times with all the noise. Thank you for that question. Well, if they have a location associated with them, we'll map it.
I'm glad to see that you stripped down some of those illustrations, and you mentioned that the media are more likely to pick that up and use it. And also for the reader, I still get a newspaper in the morning, and when they print these images, you can't even read the text on them, you can't read the type, and they're blurred out. So less is better, as far as I'm concerned for that. If you want real details, then you'll get, go online and get a digital version. A lot of people may have that by reading the newspaper online, but I still have the print copy. So that's a good improvement for me.
So one of just a comment to kind of follow up on that, funny story where I find it funny at this point. When I first started stripping and simplifying the maps, it caused waves. People really did not like information being taken off of the map, and I still spend quite a bit of time having to justify everything that's being stripped away. And so it's difficult. You have to find that balance of how much information do you put in and how much information do you keep out. We probably spend just as much amount of time brainstorming what not to put in as we do what to put into the map.
100 years later, I'm wondering, why do we still have active mining claims in the canyon?
You and me both. So I encourage you, if there's something that means something to you, the mining claims, to stop this permanently, please let your representatives know that you support the Grand Canyon Protection Act, and let's make this withdrawal permanent.
Stephanie, thanks for your work and for the work of your organization, Grand Canyon Trust, in helping to preserve this area that everybody loves so much. It was occurring to me as I was listening to everybody's presentation that people do this work because they love it And you don't always get that in academic organizations, and it's clear that you love what you're doing and love the place that you're working on. You mentioned something about mapping springs in an effort to try to protect freshwater systems, and it reminded me of the growth of citizen science, the work that the Spring Stewardship Council is doing, and EPA has a citizen science website. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of getting citizens involved in developing data that can then be used in mapping projects and for conservation.
So our volunteer crews are quite powerful. I think we actually have a couple, or had a couple of volunteers that are sitting around. Has anyone volunteered with us on any trips that are in here, or helped lead a trip, Wendy? I'm going to point you out. The data that's collected, there's no way that we could do all of this on our own. And the data is very important. And without that data, I can't create what I'm creating, and it doesn't inform the issues that we are fighting, or fighting against, or fighting for. And so the citizen force that we take out is, again, quite powerful. And it ranges. Sometimes they're doing something where it takes years before it's ever actually digitized or put into something in a cartographic sense. Or sometimes we're doing something that's a little more instantaneous. An example of that is our Where Cows Don't Graze project that we're actually doing in southern Utah. Where it is directly fed into an Esri survey, the Survey 123 application, once they fill out their survey online, and we are directly mapping the work that they're doing. With the springs restoration work, it's something that we've been doing for quite some time and have done with a lot of other partners, and especially along the North Rim lands, working with the Spring Stewardship Institute in northern Arizona, and feeding information back into their system.
Hi, I apologize that this is not a question that it's specifically pertinent to your talk, although I want to thank everyone for setting this up and all the presenters. It's been wonderful. I did miss yesterday, so perhaps this was answered yesterday. For 40 years, there has been a colored geologic map of the eastern half of the Grand Canyon, easily available up at the bookstores at the canyon, but there hasn't been a western half, a colored version of the Grand Canyon geologic map. I teach geology, so colored geologic maps are helpful. Do you know, did I miss, is there one available now?
Carl talked about it yesterday.
Oh.
They're working on, I mean, there was the eastern one that he and Mike Timothy published a couple of years ago, and they're making their way.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry I missed that. Thank you.
The blue map's out of print.
And I'm sure Dr. Carl Karlstrom, excuse my voice, I'm sure Dr. Carl Karlstrom will be happy to follow up with more details about that. But yes, during his presentation, he spoke about ongoing mapping efforts. And he did speak specifically about the 1980 Dragon map, that colorful blue map I think that you're referring to, that is now unfortunately out of print, partially, he explained, due to one of the perennial dilemmas of paper maps. They are inherently unwieldy. They're large to store. So that's part of the reason that I guess they're not so commercially viable. Any other questions? We'll take one more. Is there someone waving? Oh, Carl Churchill, can you catch this? And do me a favor, why don't you walk over here, and here you go.
Hi, I was way off in the corner, so maybe I didn't see. First of all, I love the less is more approach to cartography. Getting that off my chest, what sort of software are you planning on using for those 3D maps that you're hoping to put out?
Oh, I'm going to actually put David on the spot for a second. David, do you remember what the company is that created that plugin? It's a plugin that goes into Photoshop, by the way. Oh, well, there you go. 3D map generator. You would think I would remember that. Thank you so much,
Thank you very much,
for
Stephanie.
staying with me.